all about accelerating your success. Absolutely. And it's such a fitting theme really for us within Sandler, because that epitomizes really what we look to achieve for you, our clients, but also for ourselves personally. But also it's an enormously fitting theme because, I'm sure you guys are as aware of this as I am, is that in the West we are utterly obsessive about success. You don't have to look very far to be overwhelmed by an absolute deluge of articles and books written about success. And we're quite obsessive or fanatical about evaluating the lives of people who've achieved stellar success, whether that's in business or in sport or financially, and really, trying to figure out, what are the lessons that we can take from them and apply to ourselves to help accelerate our own success. And no doubt with you guys that when we started working together, part of the reason for doing that was because you wanted either to sustain the success that you'd already achieved or achieve an even higher level of success. So first thing I'd like you to do, can each of you write down for me what is the one primary goal that you're working towards at the moment? Write that down for me. What is your primary goal that you are working towards? And we're going to develop that as we go through. And I find it really, just keep going if you haven't captured it yet, but I find it really interesting to evaluate, why are we so obsessive about success? Well, some of the reasons I think behind that are because we can see it as a way to achieving wealth or status or even happiness. But actually I think it's more complex than that. So what I'm going to show you here is a list of different reasons, different motivators if you like, as to why people are often motivated by success. What I'd like you to do is just take 30 seconds for me to scan this list and figure out for me, why are you motivated by success? That goal that you've written down, why are you motivated to want to achieve that? What is your underlying driver? You may have more than one. Because the reality is, in a room like this, a lot of you, having done your Divine profiles, for most of you, I know you are high in goal orientation. So if we're high in goal orientation, that means we love setting stretch targets and then working hard to be able to achieve them. But the chances are there's other drivers there as well. Can you see what your underlying motivation is? Okay, everyone figured one out? Yes? Okay.
Off that list.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was write it down.
No, you just need to know it. Just need to have identified it. So slightly controversially, I want to, during this first part, question our obsession with success and really ask whether or not it is always healthy. There's a couple of reasons why I want to do that, but part of that, I suppose, has been my experience as I've been in the working world. So I distinctly remember that when I first started in consulting, which I did straight from university, I remember the principals who were running that first business that I joined, and frankly, I was quite dazzled by those people. So, I looked at their status within the industry, the amount of knowledge and credibility that they had with clients, the amount of money that they earned was, pretty significant, but also just how smart they were. And really, as I looked at them as maybe a slightly naive member, entering the working world, they to me really seemed to epitomize success. But gradually, as I got to know them and started to see beneath the surface, I started to recognize that just maybe all that glittered wasn't gold. failed or failing relationships, spending very little time or quality time with their children. Some of them overwhelmed, making themselves ill by the level of stress and pressure that they were putting on themselves through work. And, the most extreme version that stands out for me was one woman who was desperate to get pregnant, but kept suffering from miscarriages, and yet seemed unable to ease up from the level of work and pressure she was putting herself under. So ending up in random countries, in random hospitals, dealing with the trauma of yet another miscarriage. And the more I started to look around, the more I started to see these negative side effects of success. So this list here, I could have put 200 names up on here. I've just pulled some names out. This is a list of people who've achieved extreme levels of success, whether that's in sport or in business or financially. Every single one of those people have publicly spoken about the challenges that they've faced with the negative side effects of success. Now, it is a spectrum, ranging anywhere from anxiety through to mental health issues, through to addiction, all the way up to suicide. And I'd add my dad to that list. Now, admittedly, maybe not quite so famous as these guys, but he was a really successful entrepreneur. He started and built up his own business through sheer hard graft and tenacity. He then went on to be able to sell that business and set himself up well. And yet while he was doing that, he felt huge amounts of stress and pressure. And having sold that business and now retired, he now can't see the level of success that he achieved. He questions it. And he questions a lot of the decisions and the actions that he took along the way. How can that be right? How can we end up having worked so hard for so long and yet end up with regret? So part of what I want to do today is really to, I suppose, unpick this a little bit more and look at what are some of the underlying reasons why pursuing success does not guarantee lasting happiness. Okay? As I go through these, this is really going to be an exercise in self-reflection, to be honest. I want you to be evaluating each of those reasons from your own personal perspective. What resonates with you as I go through these? Where have you seen evidence that backs this up? Because I think there's an overwhelming wealth of it. So let's start with the first one then. So the first one is that really success, the pursuing success is frankly demanding. There's kind of no getting away from that. It takes a lot of time, effort and resources to reach a high level of success. Now, some of you might know that I used to event. So this is me and my horse Thor. And no doubt, because you're all highly perceptive, you'll figure out this eventing is an equestrian sport. It's got 3 disciplines to it. So you have dressage, so think ballet with a horse, okay? You've got show jumping, which is where you're jumping big fences, which are coloured poles, that, to be honest, if you as much as breathe on them, have a tendency to fall over. And then by far and away the most exciting bit is the cross country, which is where you're jumping, frankly, massive solid fences, where if you hit that fence, it's not the fence that's falling. So I fell into eventing, frankly, completely by accident, but very, very quickly grew to love it and become possibly borderline obsessive. It depends who you ask, who'd say that. So it came to the point where really everything came second to eventing. So it was everything, it was all that I thought about. How can we break through to the next level? What have we got to do differently to achieve a higher level of success? I spent probably the vast majority of my money on the horses, although anybody else who's got any involvement in horses will know that that is remarkably easy to do. And I went part-time so that I could spend more time training to be able to break through to the next level. It got to the point where one year, work decided, I don't know whether you remember this, but work decided one year they were going to give us a really personalised present. They decided they weren't going to give us a financial bonus. I mean, who would want something like that? So the personal present that they decided to give me was a week away with my horse. And I know, brilliant, right? I was so touched. I was like, that is fantastic. They really know me. They know what motivates me. What could be more brilliant? And that sort of cloud of joy and euphoria lasted all the way until I went home and then shared the news with my husband, sat here today, who, funnily enough, didn't quite see it in the same light as I did. To the point where it ended up that I had to go into work on Monday morning and renegotiate swapping horse for husband. Nearly got that the wrong way around. That would have been awful, 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 awful. Definitely horse for husband. And that's the level of obsession that I'm talking about, or the level of commitment that it takes to pursue a higher level of success. It can become very, all-consuming. And the challenge with that is it leads us to then to make trade-offs. Now, trade-offs are absolutely inevitable. But let's think about the kind of trade-offs that we typically make in the pursuit of success. So if we're pursuing success within work, often that means that we're trading off time with partner or children. Or it could be that actually we're spending time with them, but we are mentally distracted. Or perhaps we're trading off our physical or our mental health. I see these happen all the time. So when you look at that goal that you wrote down, what trade-offs are you making in relation to pursuing that goal? Just take 20 seconds to just write that down for me. What trade-offs are you making? Is it in these areas? Is it in different areas? What trade-offs are you making? No judgment associated with those trade-offs, but which ones are you making? Okay, so those trade-offs, they are utterly inevitable in the pursuit of success. But there are times when those trade-offs can cause us a problem. And that's when they fall into something called lurching. So if you think about what lurching is as a concept, well, it's kind of uncontrolled movement. It's sort of stumbling forwards. And what that can look like in a work context are things like procrastination. It's that whole thing of getting ready to get ready. Or it can be that actually we're just running from one thing to the next. We're not stopping to actually plan and make sure we're being really effective. Or even it is that we're executing, but we're not taking the time to step back and to review and actually figure out what lessons should we learn, how should we reset direction going forwards. Or perhaps we're not making deliberate, conscious choices. We're just letting things happen to us. Does anybody know what that creature is? There is a clue on the slide. Groundhog. Who, what?
Punxsutawney Phil.
Oh. That's way more detail than I was anticipating. But you're fine. But you're right, it's a groundhog. When we're lurching, we can suffer from Groundhog Day, which means that the challenges, the limitations that we are facing today are the same challenges that may have been holding us back 6, 12, 18 months ago. And the danger is if we keep lurching, they will continue to be the same challenges 6, 12, 18 months further down the line. So what's the connection between lurching and trade-offs? Well, it really falls into three main categories. And as I go through these, again, this is where I want a bit of self-reflection. Looking at those trade-offs that you've identified, when, if ever, do you fall into lurching? So those three areas. The first one is when we're not making conscious, informed choices. We're letting those trade-offs just happen. We are never taking the time to take a step back and figure out what are the medium to long-term consequences of continuing those trade-offs, and am I okay with those consequences? The second area is where we allow trade-offs to go on for too long. We know when we're making trade-offs. We may feel a bit of guilt around them. We may have the best of intentions about redressing the balance, but somehow never get round to doing it. That's lurching when we fall foul of that second one. And the last one, which I am most definitely, historically, have been guilty of, particularly when I was eventing, is about not managing other people's expectations. We expect people to be okay with those trade-offs. Perhaps that's because they've always been okay with them in the past. So why would that change? Or maybe we're not even aware of the consequences, how they are impacting other people. So those trade-offs can, lurching in those trade-offs can hurt us really, either because we might feel trapped sometimes in the trade-offs that we're making. We feel like we've got no choice, we've got to do them. Or they can hurt us and impact our happiness because, frankly, we're getting grief and pressure from other people who are on the receiving end of those trade-offs. So which of those resonate with you? Where are you lurching in the trade-offs that you're making? Okay, so the second reason why success doesn't automatically lead to happiness is actually because of how we measure it. So we don't tend to measure success through happiness, partly because that's really hard to do. So instead, we tend to use other measurements, which are maybe a bit more materialistic or status driven. So that's things like, how much money does somebody earn, or what kind of car do they drive, or how big is their business, how many people report into them. Those are all proxy measurements that we use to judge our level of success with other people. And the one factor we don't build in is happiness. How happy is that other person when we're benchmarking how we view our success compared to them? And the problem with that is because there's always going to be somebody who earns more, who has a bigger business, who has more people reporting into them, who lives in a nicer area. That bit is never going to go away. So we can then end up discounting or feeling dissatisfied about the level of success that we have achieved. Whereas it might not be the level of success that's the problem, it might just be a measurement issue. Make sense? And we can end up feeling dissatisfied about how, the level of success we've achieved. So then, third reason why happiness is not guaranteed from success is to do with outcomes, because achieving outcomes does not necessarily lead to lasting happiness. So if we think in Cambridge, we're kind of surrounded by a lot of people who are tech entrepreneurs or budding tech entrepreneurs. It can sometimes feel, when you're out and about, that every other person you meet wants to be a tech entrepreneur and build their business up to, be that next massive success story that they're able to then sell and make an awful lot of money and, be set for life. But what's really interesting is talking to those people who've already done it, who've, if you like, lived the dream. And I have to say, in my experience, often those people are no happier. Even though they've achieved their ultimate goal, many of them would not say that they were particularly happy. And for many of us who are goal-oriented, because we love to strive to achieve those big goals, what that can mean is it becomes all about the goal setting. It becomes all about, let's just throw that flag out further. And we forget to stop and actually enjoy the journey and celebrate those mini successes along the way. So again, we can end up feeling dissatisfied by the amount of progress that we're making. So achieving outcomes does not necessarily lead us to happiness. And then finally, the last one I want to talk you through is really about how our priorities might shift over time. So some psychologists talk about there being different peaks in our lives. So first peak being around about the ages of 20 to 40, where really what we're focused on here is things like building our careers or building wealth, material possessions. It might be when we're getting married or we're starting families. There's a second peak, though, that happens later in life when we have a shift potentially in our values and our priorities. And that second peak happens roughly from the age of 60. And that's when people, rather than wanting to keep accumulating wealth and possessions, tend to shift, or some shift. And actually the focus there is much more about giving back to other people, which can either be financial or knowledge or time. So Bill Gates is a classic example of this. So if you think about the stellar success that he achieved from a business perspective, he then switched to become a philanthropist, setting up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and funding it to a large extent, which is a charity that's all about giving back and helping people who are in extreme poverty. That's a classic example of somebody shifting from their first peak to their second peak. So the challenge that we've got with this is that the decisions that we're making now, presumably we believe they are the right decisions. How do we know if 20, 30, 40 years further down the line, we're going to feel any regret around the decisions that we've made? That's tricky to know. But I want to help you to start to think about that. So this is going to be an individual exercise for each of you. So we can't think that 20 to 40 years further down the line, but it's easier to think about just 10 years further down the line. So I'd like each of you to start imagining what life would be like 10 years from now. So start to think about it for me in terms of not something we ever really want to focus on, but age. Sorry. What age will you be 10 years from now? So in the spirit of confession, 52 I will be. What a terrifying thought. What about the other people who are important to you in your lives? How old will they be? So Archie, my son, he'll be 18. My parents will be 95 and 82. That is an awful lot of change that's going to happen in the next 10 years. So start to visualize that for me. Think about those people who are important to you in your life. What age will they be? Get a sense of what that's going to look like. And then what I want you to do is to start to work through those categories that we've got up here. So when we're thinking about what life might be like, there's up to 7 areas that we can look at. And you might recognize these from the 7 areas of goal setting that we talk about. So what about work? If you continue on the same trajectory that you're on today, what will work look like 10 years from now? What about family? And with this, I'd be thinking about quality of relationships. How do you anticipate that those relationships will be 10 years from now? What about your personal health? If you continue on the same trajectory, where will that take you? What about financially or socially? The critical thing with this exercise, this is not about making it aspirational. This is not where do I want to be 10 years from now in each of these categories. This is about being brutally honest with yourself and saying, if I continue as I am now, what is that going to look like in each of those different areas? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to start to work through that. I want you to get quite a concrete sense of what life might look like 10 years from now. So the first one there is, how did I get here? As in, what are you doing today that means there is a high probability that you will end up at that point in 10 years' time?
So it's how did I get there?
Yes.
Not how did I-
Yeah, as in, what are you doing now that if you keep doing it means you'll end up there in 10 years' time? As in, what are you doing today
Yes.
that if you keep doing
How am I
the
going to
same?
get there then?
No. well, it's how will I end up there? It's what are you doing now that means you will end up there in 10 years? As in, if you continue as you are, that 10 years is the consequence, however you visualized it. Does that make sense?
Let's actually.
In 10 years, you're going to be a non-functioning
So in 10 years, I'm going to look back, and that's why I first the question.
No. You're asking, well, yes, you're imagining yourself 10 years. Yeah, you're imagining yourself 10 years from now. That's it. Thank you, Rory. So then the second bit is, well, what trade-offs have you made during that 10-year period? Again, if you're continuing as you are. And then finally, and this is the crucial one, I want you to then identify, armed with that knowledge now, is there anything that you would do differently? That's the bit that I want you to identify from this. Is there anything you would do differently? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Either is fine. But is there anything you would do differently?
There are things you could do differently, but you might choose not to do
Mm-hmm.
differently. Distinct.
And it comes down to what your view is of that year, 10 years from now. Are you happy with that? Are you comfortable with that?
60, I'm not going to be up there.
Should we not dwell on the age side, but it's not great, is it? No. No. Yeah, exactly. I don't think you should need sticks then. No, you should be fine. So what, if anything, would you have done differently armed with that knowledge? So the whole point of this exercise, it's really got two purposes. One is for you to identify, is what you're doing actually where you want it to be, which is fantastic, then it gives you confirmation to keep going in the same way. But it's also there to act as an early warning system. Is there anything that you would like to change as a result of having worked through this? And what I would say with this as an exercise is that really it's not about just doing this once and then leaving it. I would suggest coming back to this on an annual basis and it doesn't have to take a ton of time, but just checking in and seeing, is there anything it flags up as an early warning system? Okay. So let me just give you 2 minutes to discuss what you've identified from that exercise in your tables, please. What, if anything, do you take away from having gone through that, other than wishing you didn't have to sit there and project 10 years in the future from an age perspective? On you go. 2 minutes, short and sharp. Okay, so we've spent a bit of time talking about some of the underlying reasons why success doesn't guarantee getting to happiness. I suppose I'd like to kind of take stock a little bit and figure out, well, so what does that all mean? Why does that matter? So does it really mean that then we shouldn't be striving for success, or that we should be compromising on the level of success that we're striving for? I absolutely do not believe either of those. I think it really comes down to a definition of success, and that actually when we can get a very crystallized, personal definition of what success means to each and every single one of you, that's when we can strike the right balance. So then how the hell do we do that? Because what we're then trying to do is to balance that side of us that wants to be successful, so that goal-oriented side of us that likes to strive and achieve goals, yet we want to have a balanced life that we're able to achieve happiness now and in the future. Well, the first part of it actually is to reframe your thinking and challenge whether or not happiness is actually the right metric for us to be aiming for. Because the problem with happiness, well, there's a couple of problems really. One is that actually, if you think happiness, really a lot of the time it's a mindset or an attitude, and we obviously talk about that an awful lot within Sandler. And that's a choice. Do we choose to see the best of a situation, or do we choose to see the worst of it? But actually there's a much bigger problem with happiness. And if we think fundamentally about what happiness is, it is an emotion that happens in response to something. An emotion that happens in response to something. So what that means is that happiness can only ever be temporary. We can't rely on it. It is going to come and go. That is inevitable. So instead, what I advocate is that we lead a meaningful life, which is actually based much more on achieving a sense of well-being rather than just happiness. So if we maybe unpick a little bit about what well-being is, because it's a much broader concept than just happiness. It has happiness in there, but when we have a sense of happiness, a sense of well-being, that's really what gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us focus, and it can help us to feel in control. So what could possibly be wrong with any of that? So if that's the goal that we're aiming for, that more consistent sense of well-being, how do we do that? So it comes back to this definition of success. So I'm going to share with you what are my 5 drivers of a successful life. I know that if I consistently achieve balance across these 5 areas, that leads to a profound sense of well-being with an awful lot of happiness as part of that. So I'm going to talk you through very briefly what my 5 are, and then I'm going to ask you to start to identify your own personal drivers, because they will be different for each and every person in the room. So my 5 drivers of a meaningful life, if I start at the top, great family life is an enormously important one. So that for me really is about ensuring that life outside work is as fabulous as it can possibly be, and that that's happening by design rather than by accident. The second one for me is really about undertaking challenges. I'm very high in goal orientation, and that means that I derive great satisfaction from doing challenges, which to many people seem utterly ridiculous. So let me give you some examples. So one of them, maybe not so ridiculous, but I had a goal this year of speaking main stage client summit. That was a really satisfying, terrifying, but satisfying experience. Another one was that we decided that we'd run up one of the tallest Munros in Scotland in winter in the dark, just really because we could. It was a bit of a challenge. Could we do it? Yes, still here. Growing the business is always part of one of those key drivers for me, as is improving the environment. I'm quite environmentally focused. That's my way of kind of contributing, giving back, if you like. So it's really important to me that that is in the mix. And then the last bit for me is spending time with wider friends and family. And by that, I really mean people who are a bit geographically more remote. I mean, like you guys, life is frankly hectic. And those are the people that, you know, are very important to us, but are just that bit further away and we never get round to seeing. So for me, it's about how do I get balance across those 5 different areas. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this, because I think this one takes a bit of thinking about. I would like you to identify your drivers in life, the things that are most important to you. If some of mine resonate, steal. Nothing wrong with that. But come up with between 3 and 5 drivers that you know, if you were to consistently get balance across those 5, would lead to that sense of well-being that I was talking about. So 5 minutes to identify between 3 and 5 drivers. Okay. So this, are we? Sorry, don't worry, there will be another opportunity. So this, I firmly believe there is something immensely powerful about figuring out what your drivers are. But what we then have to do is keep those drivers front of mind. So probably won't surprise many of you who've been in the Sales Mastery program that I journal about my drivers. They are in my daily journal, those things that are important to me. I also write them at the front of my notebook so I see them on an ongoing basis. But just knowing your drivers often isn't going far enough, actually what we need to do is understand what are the ingredients that sit underneath each of those drivers so that we know, are we truly fulfilling each of the different components of that. So again, as an individual exercise, what I'd like you to do is to pick, we've only got time, I'm afraid, for just one driver. So pick either the one that you feel is perhaps you might pick it because you feel like it's getting neglected a bit at the moment, or perhaps pick the one that is most important to you. So what you've got here is my mind map for a great family life. So this took me no time at all to come up with. Actually, it was a really interesting exercise. What took longer was to make sure my 5 drivers were right. Once you've got them right, I think it's dead easy then to know what are the ingredients. So just to pull out just a couple of those to give you sort of a sense, I suppose, of the blend of things that are in here. I mean, some of it is around what I kind of think of as sort of attitude components, I suppose, as in, things like ensuring that there's a lot of sort of natural child within the family. And by that, I mean having fun, just having so much fun. And that, Archie is 8. He's all about having fun. But maybe sometimes I forget and get a bit serious sometimes and maybe squash that fun a little bit. So that's to remind me that actually it's okay to just have fun. Or perhaps it's things like not going to bed on an argument. So easy to do. Or actually maybe it's more about what are we doing? So things like going to new places and experiences. Archie, for example, came to Orlando to the summit. Lucky boy, he got to sit through my talk. He was thrilled. He came up on stage, so that compensated, I believe, for it anyway. So I'd like you to do this exercise for just one of those drivers. Pick the one that really is going to be of the most value to you. What are the ingredients that really add up together to you fulfilling that driver? Again, it's going to be very personal. What are those ingredients for you for just one of those drivers? On you go. After today's session, to continue doing the rest of your mind maps. So you've got a mind map for each of those 5 drivers and then having them up visually so they're there as a reminder for you. But I really do believe that just knowing those drivers, it gives us a sense of focus, it helps us with decision making, and it gives us a sense of perspective. But sometimes, maybe for some of you, you might need to go a little bit further than just knowing what your drivers are and doing a mind map for them. For some of you, that might be more than enough. But those of you who recognise that maybe you have to do things a little bit differently, there's really 3 things that I guess I'd get you to consider, whether or not these are valuable for you. No rocket science within any of this, but let's start with the first one, so around habit forming and accountability. So if we truly do want to change something in terms of how we are living our life through those drivers to get that balance, that life full of well-being, then maybe there's sometimes some habit changes that we need to make or get people to hold us accountable. So an example that I'd share with this, I suppose, really maps to my driver of great family life. So we got feedback from Archie that he felt that we were spending too much time on our phones in the evening. Bad parenting. Oops. I'm sure I'm not the only one. Emails. And what we decided to do is that we'd put a habit in place to help us to change that behaviour. So it was a very simple one. It basically was when we came in, we put our phones down and they would stay there until he went to bed. Now, are we perfect? No, definitely not. But we are so much more aware. But the other difference is that we've basically said to him that he can call us on it. If we're slipping into bad habits, he can pull us up. So to help figure out that habit forming and accountability, I think it can be beneficial to share your drivers, your mind maps with those who are important to you, who would help you enforce that or reinforce that behaviour. And agreeing really an upfront contract with them, that it is okay for them to tell you if they feel like things are getting out of kilter. But obviously doing that in a very adult way, not everyone getting frustrated and emotional. So that's maybe one thing to consider. Are there any small habit changes that you could make? And I'm talking a really small number here, not trying to change too much. that might just help you get a little bit of behaviour change. Second one around that is setting goals. Obviously, can be very powerful. But again, it's about not trying to do too ambitious goals or in too many areas. So an example of where I've used setting goals to help me shift so I get even more balance across my drivers is really around the driver of spending more time with wider friends and family. So the simple goal around that is once a month we will spend a weekend or some time in a weekend with somebody who is in that wider friends and family group. It's actually, with a bit of planning, it's a really simple thing to do. And it means we're spending a lot more time with those people and getting much more enjoyment from it. And then the last one there is around those trade-off decisions. So, I said before that trade-offs, they're absolutely inevitable in the pursuit of success, for sure. We cannot get away from that. But I think it's really about sanity checking. Are we falling into lurching in the trade-off decisions that we're making? So what I'd suggest when you're doing your monthly planning, as indeed I know you all religiously do, maybe thinking about, obviously I'm seeing lots of confirming nods, yes, absolutely, but maybe thinking about, okay, if I look at that month ahead, or you can do it a week ahead, you pick the time frame, what trade-offs am I going to have to make to achieve, what I've got to achieve in that time frame? And then whose expectations do I need to manage about those trade-offs? How am I going to do that? So we can do that on a rolling basis, but what I would also suggest is roughly once a quarter, taking a bit of a bigger step back and evaluating further, and to see whether or not actually we are selling out. So selling out is when we are doing the same trade-offs for 3 or more months consecutively. Hard to say, 3 or more months consecutively. When we're doing that, we are perhaps selling out. That might not be in the best interests of ourselves or others who are important to us. So it is literally on a quarterly basis just checking in, saying, okay, what trade-offs did I make over the last 3 months, and am I okay with that? Or have any of those gone on too long? Have I fallen into lurching? Do I need to do something differently? So for those of you who want to make change, I'd really encourage you to think about those 3 areas. Is there anything you can leverage from there that just might help you make a difference in living your life through those drivers? So what you've got is your very familiar, for most of you, lessons learned forms. Can you just take stock for me? So what I'd really like you to identify is what is your primary lesson learned from what we've talked through? And maybe it's confirmation that you are absolutely doing the right things. Or maybe there is something you'd like to adjust in there. So what's your lesson learned? What are you going to start doing? And what, if anything, are you going to stop doing? Leave a bit of space, because the second exercise we're going to do, I'll get you to just keep going with the same lessons learned forms. So you've only got one to take away. Thinking about saving the planet, obviously. What's your lesson from what we've talked about so far? What will you start doing? What, if anything, will you stop doing? Okay, when you're there, in 30 seconds or less, can each of you share your lessons learned and what action you're going to take in pairs or in your table? Literally 30 seconds or less. Super short and sweet for me. Cake is waiting. So it said in the video that I showed you at the beginning, the one from the summit, that Sandler has changed hundreds of thousands of lives. I really and truly believe that if you let this stuff, if you truly embrace this stuff, it really can change your life. And this for me is a small part of doing that, which is why I wanted to bring you here today to share that with you. The quote that I like the most about success is by a poet, actually. And you've got the quote up here. Success is liking yourself, what you do, and how you do it. I love that as a quote. If you live your life through your drivers, then I believe that is the only possible outcome. How powerful is that? So if any of these 3 things are important to you, then I would really encourage you to not let today, or this first part of today, just be an interesting exercise, but actually to do something different as a result of it. I am happy to hold you accountable. If you need help with that, just ask. So if you're interested in continuing to achieve and to have a sense of well-being over the long term, if you don't want to feel regret about your choices later in life, or if you want to bring more well-being, happiness to other people who are important to you, then I would really encourage you to take something from what we've talked about today and implement it with immediate effect.